The biggest obstacle to true power isn't external opposition or lack of opportunity or insufficient resources. The biggest obstacle is the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. Most of these stories were written when you were very young by people who meant well, but who were operating from their own limitations and fears. You've been living these stories for so long that you think they're true, that they're facts about reality, rather than interpretations of experience that can be questioned and changed. I remember the story I told myself for years about needing to prove my worth through achievement, about needing to be perfect, to be lovable, about needing to hide my vulnerabilities to be respected. These stories drove me to accomplish many things, but they also kept me trapped in a cycle of never feeling like enough, never feeling like I could rest, never feeling like I could simply be myself without having to earn that right through performance. The breakthrough came when I realized that these stories weren't protecting me. They were limiting me. They weren't keeping me safe. They were keeping me small. The moment I began to question these stories, to see them as choices rather than facts, I began to access a power I never knew I had. Not the power to control outcomes or manipulate circumstances, but the power to respond to life from my authentic center rather than from my conditioned patterns. This shift changes everything. When you stop trying to prove your worth and start expressing your truth, your whole relationship with life transforms. Challenges become opportunities for growth rather than threats to your identity. Failures become feedback rather than evidence of inadequacy. Other people's opinions become information rather than verdicts on your value. You begin to move through the world with a different kind of energy, a different kind of presence, a different kind of power. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about becoming fearless or never feeling doubt or uncertainty. Fear and doubt are part of the human experience, and trying to eliminate them is another form of the perfectionism that keeps you trapped. True power includes these experiences without being controlled by them. It's like learning to surf. You don't eliminate the waves. You learn to ride them, to work with their energy rather than against it, to find stability in the midst of constant motion. The same is true with your internal experience. You don't eliminate fear. You don't eliminate fear. You learn to feel afraid and act courageously anyway. You don't eliminate doubt. You learn to feel uncertain and move forward anyway. You don't eliminate the voice of self-criticism. You learn to hear it without believing everything it says, to recognize it as one voice among many, rather than the ultimate authority on your worth and capabilities. This brings me to one of the most important principles I've discovered about true power. It's not about being strong all the time. It's about being real all the time. Strength without authenticity is just posturing. Confidence without truth is just arrogance. Success without integrity is just hollow achievement. But when your actions flow from your genuine truth, when your choices align with your deepest values, when your expression emerges from your authentic self, then you access a power that is both gentle and unstoppable, both humble and magnificent. I think about the difference between forcing a door open and finding the right key. When you're operating from false power, from ego and fear and the need to prove yourself, you're constantly forcing doors, trying to make things happen through sheer will and effort. It's exhausting and often ineffective. But when you're operating from true power, from authenticity and presence and trust in your own nature, you find the keys that open doors effortlessly. Opportunities appear, resources become available, connections form naturally, not because you're manipulating circumstances, but because you're aligned with something deeper than your personal agenda. This alignment isn't something you achieve once and then maintain forever. It's something you practice daily, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's like tuning a musical instrument. You don't tune it once and expect it to stay in tune forever. You tune it regularly, adjusting it as conditions change, maintaining the clarity and harmony that allows beautiful music to emerge. The same is true with your internal alignment. You don't find your authentic self once and then coast on that discovery for the rest of your life. You choose authenticity again and again in each interaction, in each decision, in each moment when you could either express your truth or hide behind a comfortable lie. This ongoing choice, this daily practice of being real, is where true power is cultivated and expressed, waxed. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't work in the sense of struggle or effort or grinding towards some distant goal. When you're aligned with your authentic nature, being real feels like relief, not effort. It's like finally taking off shoes that have been too tight all day. There's an immediate sense of expansion, of coming home to yourself, of no longer having to maintain a performance that was exhausting you without you even realizing it. I remember the first time I experienced this kind of relief. I was at a dinner party, surrounded by industry people who expected me to be the confident, charismatic person they had seen in films. I was playing the role perfectly, saying the right things, projecting the right image, but inside I felt completely disconnected from myself. Then something shifted. I stopped trying to be impressive and started being honest. I shared something real about my struggles as an actor, about my fears and uncertainties. The room went quiet, and for a moment I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then something beautiful happened. The conversation became real. People started sharing their own struggles, their own fears, their own authentic experiences. The energy in the room completely transformed, and I realized that by being vulnerable, by being real, I hadn't lost power. I had accessed a deeper kind of power, the power to create genuine connection and authentic communication. This is what true power does. It doesn't dominate or control or impress. It liberates. It creates space for others to be real too. It invites authenticity rather than demanding performance. It builds bridges rather than walls. When you stop trying to prove how powerful you are and start expressing who you really are, you give everyone around you permission to do the same. This kind of power requires tremendous courage because it means giving up the illusion of control. Or when you're performing, when you're trying to manage other people's impressions of you, you feel like you have some control over outcomes. It's a false sense of control, but it can feel safer than the uncertainty of being genuine. True power means accepting that you can't control how others respond to your authenticity, but trusting that expressing your truth is always the right choice regardless of the outcome. This trust isn't blind faith or naive optimism. It's based on the deep understanding that your authentic self is your greatest gift, both to yourself and to the world. When you hide this gift Behind masks and performances, everyone loses. You lose because you're not expressing your unique contribution. Others lose because they don't get to experience the real you. The world loses because it doesn't receive what only you offer. I've spent years studying different martial arts, different philosophies, different approaches to personal development. But the most profound teacher I've ever encountered is life itself, specifically the feedback you get when you're being real versus when you're being fake. When you're authentic, life flows, doors open, opportunities appear, relationships deepen, energy increases. When you're performing, life becomes a struggle. You're constantly pushing against resistance, trying to force outcomes, exhausting yourself in the pursuit of goals that don't really satisfy you, even when you achieve them. This feedback is always available to you. Your body knows when you're being real and when you're being fake. Your energy knows. Your emotions know. The quality of your relationships knows. The satisfaction you feel with your achievements knows. You don't need an external authority to tell you whether you're on the right track. You have an internal guidance system that's constantly giving you information about whether your choices are aligned with your truth or disconnected from it. Learning to trust this internal guidance is one of the most important skills you can develop. It's like learning to read a compass. Skills you can develop. At first, you might not trust what it's telling you, especially if it's pointing in a direction that seems scary or uncertain. But the more you follow its guidance, the more you realize how reliable it is, how it always points toward your true north, even when your mind is confused or your emotions are turbulent. Your true north isn't a destination you reach. It's a direction you follow. Follow. It's not about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more fully who you already are. It's not about acquiring power from outside yourself. It's about accessing the power that has always been within you, waiting for you to stop looking everywhere else and start trusting what you already know. The practices I'm about to share with you aren't techniques for gaining power. They're methods for removing the obstacles that prevent you from expressing the power you already possess. Think of them as ways of clearing the static that interferes with your natural signal, removing the debris that blocks your natural flow, dissolving the barriers that separate you from your authentic self. The first practice is what I call conscious breathing. Not breathing exercises or special techniques, but simply paying attention to your breath as it naturally flows. Your breath is always honest. It reflects your internal state without pretense or performance. When you're anxious, your breath is shallow and quick. When you're relaxed, it's deep and slow. When you're present, most people either suppress their emotions or are overwhelmed by them. True power comes from the middle path, feeling your emotions fully without being controlled by them. This means when anger arises, you feel it completely without immediately acting on it or pushing it away. When sadness comes, you let it flow through you without resistance or the need to fix it. When joy appears, you experience it fully without trying to hold on to it or make it permanent. Emotions are energy in motion, and when you allow them to flow naturally, they become sources of power rather than sources of disturbance. The third practice is speaking your truth with kindness. This doesn't mean saying whatever you think or feel without consideration for others. Oh, for others, it means expressing what's real for you in a way that honors both your truth and the person you're communicating with. This requires both courage and compassion, both honesty and wisdom. It's about finding the words that convey your authentic experience while respecting the humanity of others. The fourth practice is acting from choice rather than reaction. Most people live their lives in reaction mode, automatically responding to circumstances based on old patterns and conditioned habits. True power comes from the space between stimulus and response, the moment when you can choose how to act rather than simply react. This space might be just a split second, but it's where your freedom lives, where your power to create rather than just respond exists. These practices aren't goals to achieve, but ways of being to cultivate. They're not about perfection, but about presence. They're not about controlling outcomes, but about expressing your truth regardless of outcomes. The more you practice them, the more natural they become, until eventually they're not practices at all, but simply how you live. But remember, the goal isn't to become someone who always breathes consciously, always feels emotions perfectly, always speaks truth with kindness, always acts from choice. Someone who notices when you're not doing these things and gently returns to them without self-judgment or criticism. It's about developing the awareness to recognize when you've disconnected from your authentic self and the compassion to reconnect without making yourself wrong for having disconnected in the first place. This brings me to the final and most important point about true power. It's not a destination you reach, but a quality you embody. It's not something you have, but something you are. You don't become powerful by accumulating techniques or achievements or credentials. You become powerful by removing everything that isn't authentically you, by stripping away the layers of conditioning and fear and performance until only your essential self remains. This essential self is not weak or vulnerable or inadequate, although it might feel that way at first when you're used to hiding behind masks and armor. Your essential self is the source of your greatest strength, your deepest wisdom, your most profound impact. It's what the world needs from you, what only you can offer, what you came here to express and share and be. The journey to true power isn't about becoming someone extraordinary. It's about having the courage to be ordinarily yourself, completely and unapologetically. It's about trusting that who you really are is exactly what this moment needs, exactly what your relationships need, exactly what your work needs, exactly what the world needs. Stand in front of a mirror right now, if you can. Look into your own eyes. See past the image, past the story, past the roles and responsibilities and expectations. See the being who has been with you through every experience, every triumph, every failure, every joy, every joy, every joy, every sorrow. This being, this essential you, is the source of all the power you will ever need. Not power over others, but power to be yourself. Not power to control life, but power to live fully. Not power to avoid challenges, but power to meet them with your whole being. This is the power I discovered in that quiet training hall all those years ago. This is the power that transformed not just my martial arts, but my entire life. This is the power that's available to you right now, in this moment, not as something to achieve, but as something to remember, not as something to develop, but as something to uncover, not as something to earn, but as something that is your birthright, simply because you exist. True power comes from within, but within is not a place. It's not something inside your body or your mind or your heart. Within is what you are when you stop trying to be anything else. Within is the space where all the masks fall away and only truth remains. Within is where you discover that you were never powerless. You were just looking for power in all the wrong places. The mirror is waiting. Your truth is waiting. Your power is waiting. Not for you to become worthy of it, but for you to remember that you already were. The quiet in the practice room was overwhelming. I could sense my pulse resonating against the walls, my breathing rapid and light. I had just completed what I believed was an impeccable training session. Each move was executed flawlessly, every motion accurate. But as I stood there, perspiration falling onto the hardwood floor, I experienced something unexpected in my personal haven. I felt void, not the satisfying emptiness that follows giving your all, but a deep hollowness of someone who had been acting, rather than genuinely expressing themselves. That evening, gazing at my reflection in the dark windows of my school, I uncovered something that would alter everything I believed about strength, power, and what it truly means to live. You see, I had dedicated years to developing what everyone could observe: the swiftness, the accuracy, the techniques that would later bring me fame. But I had neglected what no one could perceive, what even I had feared to admit. The true essence of power isn't in your physique, your techniques, or even your intellect. It lies in something much deeper, something that most individuals spend their lives evading. Authentic power originates from within, but not in the way you might assume. Not from some mystical force or spiritual energy, but from the bravery to confront who you truly are beneath all the facades, beneath all the expectations, beneath all the fear. I recall the precise moment this realization struck me. I was demonstrating a technique to my pupils, illustrating how to generate maximum impact with minimal exertion. My body moved like a flowing river, each strike transitioning smoothly into the next. The students observed in awe, some even clapped. But as I looked at their expressions, I realized something unsettling. They weren't seeing me at all. They were seeing an image, a legend I had inadvertently created to conceal my own insecurities. In that instant, I comprehended that I had become my own greatest adversary, not through frailty, but through the very strength I believed was safeguarding me. The path to genuine power commences with a question that most individuals are too fearful to ask. Who are you when no one is observing? When there's no audience to impress, no role to perform, no image to uphold? I spent countless nights in my training hall, not rehearsing techniques, but practicing something far more challenging. I was practicing honesty with myself. And what I discovered in those dark, silent hours was both frightening and freeing. I realized that everything I believed made me powerful was actually making me weak. Let me recount the night everything transformed. I had just finished filming an especially demanding fight scene. The director commended my performance, the crew applauded, and I felt that familiar surge of validation. But as I drove home through the deserted streets of Los Angeles, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Face was mine, but the eyes belonged to someone else, someone who had forgotten how to simply exist. I pulled over and sat in my car for what seemed like hours, not moving, not thinking, just feeling the weight of a question I had been evading my entire life. What if everything I believed about power was incorrect. That night signified the start of the most crucial training I would ever undertake. Not training of the body, but training of the spirit. Not acquiring new techniques, but discarding old limitations. I began to grasp that true power isn't something you cultivate or obtain. It's something you reveal, something that has always been within you, concealed beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and the desperate need to be someone other than who you are. Consider water for a moment. Water doesn't strive to be powerful. It doesn't strain or force or struggle to surmount obstacles. Yet it can carve through solid rock, not through aggression, but through persistence, through being true to its essence. Water doesn't combat itself. It doesn't judge its own flow or criticize its own direction. It simply moves according to its intrinsic nature, adapting to whatever vessel contains it while never losing its fundamental quality. This is the kind of power I'm referring to. Not the power that comes from imposing your will upon the world, but the power that comes from aligning your actions with your deepest truth. But here's what I uncovered that altered everything. Most of us don't even know what our deepest truth is, because we've spent so long attempting to be what others expect, what society demands. What we believe will make us safe, or loved, or successful. We've constructed layer upon layer of artificial personality, like armor that we think shields us, but actually confines us. The real work, the genuine training, isn't about adding more layers. It's about having the courage to remove them, one by one, until you reach the essence of who you truly are. I recall a conversation I had with my mentor, IP Man, many years ago. He told me something that I didn't comprehend at the time, but that still resonates with me. He said, "You are very adept at combating others, but can you combat yourself?" I believed he was referring to self-discipline, about pushing through pain and fatigue. I was mistaken. He was alluding to something much more profound. He was speaking about the conflict between who you are and who you believe you should be. He was talking about the battle that rages within every human being, the struggle between authenticity and acceptance, between truth and safety, between being genuine and being liked. This internal conflict is where true power is either born or buried. Every day, in countless small moments, you choose sides in this battle. When you speak up or remain silent, when you take a risk or play it safe, when you express your truth or tell people what they want to hear, these aren't just choices about behavior. They're choices about power. Real power. Real power. The kind that can't be taken away because it doesn't depend on external circumstances or other people's approval. Let me share with you the 3 revelations that completely transformed my understanding of power. The first revelation came during an especially intense training session. I was pushing myself harder than ever, attempting to perfect a complex sequence of strikes. My body was executing the movements flawlessly, but something felt amiss. I stopped mid-technique. And realized what was happening. I was striving for perfection instead of trying to be present. I was so focused on the ideal version of the technique that I had lost connection with the actual experience of performing it. In that moment, I understood that perfectionism isn't a path to power. It's a confinement that prevents you from accessing your natural abilities. The second revelation came during a moment of complete failure. I was sparring with a student who was much less experienced than me, and he landed a clean hit that sent me stumbling backward. My ego was bruised, my image shattered, and for a moment I felt completely exposed. But in that vulnerability, something remarkable happened. I felt more alive, more present, more real than I had in months. I realized that my need to always appear strong, always be in control, always have the answers, was actually making me weaker. True power doesn't come from never falling down. It comes from being willing to fall down, to be seen as imperfect, to be human. The third revelation was the most profound of all. I was meditating one evening, not trying to achieve any particular state or insight, just sitting quietly with myself. Suddenly, I became aware of a voice in my head that had been running constantly, like background noise I had learned to ignore. This voice was always commenting, always judging, always trying to improve or fix or change something about my experience. And I realized that this voice, this internal critic, it was exhausting me, draining my energy, keeping me in a constant state of internal conflict. The moment I stopped listening to that voice, stopped trying to satisfy its endless demands, I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I had ever experienced. Unlike anything I had ever experienced. Not the adrenaline rush of competition or the satisfaction of achievement, but something deeper, calmer, and infinitely more sustainable. These revelations led me to understand that true power has nothing to do with dominating others and everything to do with liberating yourself. Not liberation from external circumstances, but liberation from the internal patterns that keep you trapped in cycles of struggle and dissatisfaction. Most people think power is about getting what you want, but I learned that real power is about wanting what you have, being who you are, expressing what's true for you in each moment without apology or explanation. But this kind of power requires something that most people aren't willing to give. It requires the courage to disappoint others. It requires the strength to stand alone when necessary. It requires the wisdom to know that you can't please everyone and the maturity to stop trying. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or uncaring. It means becoming so secure in your own truth that you can genuinely care for others without losing yourself in the process. I think about my early days in Hollywood, constantly being told I was too Chinese for American audiences, too American for Chinese audiences, too philosophical for action films, too physical for dramatic roles. For a while, I tried to fit into their molds, to become what they wanted me to be. But every compromise I made took me further away from my own power, further away from the unique contribution I had come to make. It was only when I stopped trying to fit in and started expressing my authentic vision that real opportunities began to appear. Not because the industry changed, but because I stopped betraying myself to gain their approval. This is the paradox of true power. The more you try to get it, the more it eludes you. The more you try to prove you have it, the more you demonstrate that you don't. Real power is quiet, natural, effortless. It doesn't announce itself or demand recognition. It simply exists. Like the sun doesn't try to shine, like water doesn't try to flow, like your heart doesn't try to beat. True power is the natural expression of your authentic self, unfiltered by fear, unconditioned by others' expectations, uncompromised by the need to be anything other than what you are. But accessing this power requires a kind of training that no gym or school can provide. It requires the daily practice of honesty with yourself. It requires the courage to feel your feelings without immediately trying to change them, or fix them, or escape them, It requires the discipline to notice when you're performing versus when you're being, when you're reacting from fear versus when you're responding from truth, when you're trying to impress others versus when you're expressing yourself. To yourself, I developed a practice that I've never shared publicly before, something I call the mirror of truth. Every morning before I begin my physical training, I stand in front of a mirror and ask myself 3 questions. First, what am I afraid of today? Not the obvious fears like physical danger or failure, but the subtle fears that influence my choices throughout the day. The fear of being judged, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being too much or not enough. Second, what am I pretending today? What roles am I playing? What masks am I wearing? What parts of myself am I hiding to maintain a certain image? Third, what wants to be expressed through me today? Not what I think should be expressed or what others expect to be expressed, but what genuinely wants to emerge from my deepest truth. These questions aren't meant to be answered intellectually. They're meant to be felt, experienced, lived. The answers don't come from thinking, but from a deeper kind of knowing. The kind that emerges when you stop trying to figure everything out and start trusting the wisdom that already exists within you. This wisdom isn't something you develop or acquire. It's something you uncover by removing the obstacles that prevent you from accessing it.